All right, now that we've learned how we can commit libel, let's see if there have any defenses that will help protect us from it. Now, one of the first one that was set up came in this case, and it's a pretty important one for reporters, this Hearst versus Capital Cities Media in 2001. You can see the facts of the case here that Hearst was reported in the Capital newspapers to have been questioned for 2 hours by police in a rape case. The police and Hearst didn't comment, and the Hearst was ultimately not charged, but he sued Capital for false light, invasion of privacy, claiming that he was represented in a false light because they covered that he'd been questioned. Now, what the appeals court held was that when the media truthfully reports information given by public officials that places a person in a false light, even if the information's false, the media is not at fault so long as the reporting was accurate. And what this is the idea of fair reporting. So let's take a look at what that means. The plaintiff has to prove these things, that he was placed in a false light because, as a result of the defendant's actions, that the newspaper did this, that the false light would be highly offensive, and I think you can agree that both of these things are applicable here. But it's the third one that's a question. The defendant acted with knowledge that the information was false or with reckless disregard for whether it was true or false. And there was no way that was held up here because the article didn't say that Hearst was a suspect or he'd been identified as a criminal. And so the fact that they got information from a qualified, reasonable source and they published it fairly and accurately, this falls under our protection of fair reporting privilege. Now, another protection that's been established, and you can see this was quite some time ago, came in the Cherry Sisters versus the Des Moines Leader. The Cherry Sisters were actually pretty famous as a vaudeville act, but they were not as popular as you might expect among this particular reviewer who wrote this, that Effie Spavin, Addie's Knock-Kneesed and Stringhalt, and Jessie, the only one who showed in her stockings, has legs with calves is classic, and their outline is the curves of broom handles. So not a very complimentary thing. This review was reprinted in the Des Moines Leader, and the Cherry Sisters ended up filing a defamation suit. Now, the decision was initially that it's going to uphold the trial court's directed verdict. They preserve the right of fair comment. And so what this means is that if you are giving a performance in public, even if the performer disagrees with the reviewer's characterizations, someone goes up there with the idea of being evaluated by a public, you have the right to evaluate them based on your opinion. And so in this decision, one of the most significant things was this idea that there's no such thing as a false idea. And so now you may read some very scathing reviews. They actually come back to this idea of fair reporting based on this no such thing as a false idea, this idea of opinion. Now, there are qualifications that come into that, and one of them came in 1985 here with Bert L. Ullman. He was offered a job as a chair of the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. But these two reporters, Evans and Novak, wrote a column they're actually syndicated columnists at the time, and it said that they called him a Marxist professor, and they questioned whether or not he was qualified. That ultimately, his job offer was rescinded, and he said it was because of the column. He sued them for $6 million. Now, the decision actually found for the reporters a pretty close decision. I put that it was led by Ken Starr, because those of you interested in politics may realize that he actually led the impeachment against Bill Clinton in that investigation. But what this did is it led to the Ullman test. And you can see this is a 4-part test that says, is the statement verifiable? Is it objectively true or false? What is the common meaning of the words? What is the journalistic context? So is it part of a publication reserved for opinion? Is it an editorial? What was it? Consider the column as a whole, and what is the broader social context in which this statement fit? And based on this decision, the Court of Appeals felt that these journalists did not overstep their boundaries. Now, we also have the idea of parody and satire and whether or not that can be libelous. And it's one of the more interesting aspects of libel law that one of our key cases comes from Hustler magazine. So the question is, if the material on which a libel case is based is too outrageously believable, can it really damage a reputation? And the court says no. So we're relating specifically to this particular advertisement about Jerry Falwell. This appeared in Hustler magazine. And it was a parody of a Campari gin ad, and it basically said that this fundamentalist minister had a drunken, incestuous relationship with his mother in an outhouse. So Jerry Falwell sues. He ends up winning initially, but Hustler magazine appeals all the way to the Supreme Court with this question about whether the First Amendment freedom of speech protection extends to making offensive comments. And really, they decided unanimously, yes, that in the interest of protecting free speech, that something that is so unreasonable to the average person that would not be realistically construed does have free speech protection. Now, another case that came up here is Edwards versus the National Audubon Society. And basically, in this one, they reported in an article, the National Audubon Society reported that a group of scientists were being paid to lie about pesticide companies regarding their use of pesticide and the effect it was having on birds. So the Times wrote a story on this controversy. They quoted sources on both sides, but scientists said they were libelous. They were libeled in this New York Times story. And what was decided here is that democracy can't be served unless people are given the information they need to make an informed decision. So even though this information may have been defamatory and it may have ultimately been proved to be false, the Times reported it fairly, accurately, and neutrally, and that protected them.